Elon Musk and other so-called futurists are now asking for the pause of AI lab work. And they want people who are in the AI development space not to stop the big advancements, but to just pause maybe its applications in the short term, because they fear, Elon Musk and others fear, that this will cause too much of a burden, disruption, catastrophe on human society. In order to show the insurmountable chasm between AI and technology and the infinite, complex, vast, for lack of a better word, miracle of the human form of consciousness, I'm going to do this in poetry. So now the access to ChatGPT that I have is an app that I got called Genie. So there may be some that are better than this, although I doubt this. But I want to actually, so what I did was I got a poem, a sonnet, so a very specific form of a poem. And I chose a poem that has, I think, although very complex complexities to it, one by Robert Frost. And I took out what are generally the, understood and what I understand, the main abstract themes to be. And in this case, I chose, I'll tell you the poem in a little bit. I'm not going to spoil it yet. But some of you, if you know poetry, may know this one. But isolation, sorrow, and despair. If you look this poem up when I'm done, you'll see that that's generally what this is about. I mean, you could add it to like frustration and loneliness might be another way to describe it. But, a human emotion, a human experience, how does ChatGPT, how does the genie come up with something? And how does one of the great poets come up with something? And the thing is that Robert Frost was very smart. He had a very big vocabulary. You have to have a very large vocabulary to be a good poet in the particular language. But he has nothing. He doesn't have a candle to the burning flame of the access to language that ChatGPT does. And yet, because he has what, the ancients and what many have called the gift of fire, and that's what I call it. That's the human form of free will consciousness, that he is able to create something on such a grander scale that I think when we first look at these different poems, if you don't analyze them, if you don't think about them, if you don't really dig into them and spend time with each of the poems, you cannot tell the difference between an AI robot and the beautiful, myriad, multifaceted, infinitely changing, faceted human consciousness, and how spectacular it is. It's one of the grandest things in all the universe is the human free will consciousness that you possess in your mind. And even if you're not able to achieve the poetic heights of Robert Frost, by seeing that, we see, and this is what I'm excited about with this ChatGPT, and I might do a whole series with short stories and probably more poetry of comparing ChatGPT to poetry, because it really sharpens your mind about how beautiful the uniqueness, the grandiosity of your mind. And I would argue that the grandiosity of your mind is barely tapped by you. And that's one of the things of why you should read great literature, by the way, is to develop your conscious mind more and more. Okay, so let's go into this. I want to start with the ChatGPT, the Genie one, and I'm going to try my best. So I've read it once because I wanted to do it. I only did the generate once. I didn't keep regenerating until I got something I didn't like. I just wanted to try it. I did not regenerate this. I created again, so a sonnet is 14 lines. It's a very specific form. It has iambic pentameter. So it's got a certain rhythm to it. And this ChatGPT got that, I think, basically correct. I mean, I didn't do, an analysis of the feet, but it's pretty simple, in a sense. And I think they got it. And so, but what isn't gotten in the sound versus the sense and in the meaning, in the creation of helping me, a reader, experience sorrow, isolation, despair is very different. And that's where the chasm comes into play. That's where the insurmountable chasm. Okay. Oops. Here we go. Make sure this is all set up. All right. So this is the ChatGPT poem on isolation, sorrow, despair. Again, what I put in as the genre is Sonnet Iambic Pentameter to see what it would do. So it seemed like it got that part. So I'm going to read this. If you're listening, here, I also have this on YouTube if you want to watch, if you want to look at the words, but I'll try and say it slow. And I'm going to try my best to get into it, but it's, kind of robotic, as you'll see. Alone I stand, my heart in grief and pain, grief for my loss and pain for my disdain. I've never felt so low and forlorn, my sorrow deep, my hope all but worn. No shoulder to cry on, no one to hear, my sadness grows deep, a river of fear. No solace found, no one to hold, my spirit crushed, my heart grown cold. My heart's in despair, my soul in chains, my faith in life all but drained. In darkness deep, I'm lost and alone, my joy in life all but gone. I cannot escape, I'm here to remain, my isolation, my sorrow, and my pain. But though I may feel this way for a while, my faith in life will eventually smile. By the way, they got that little, what is it? I can't remember. I always forget the last two lines is a certain term. I always forget the name of it, where it's kind of answering the question. So the opening thing. So, I mean, they got look, if you didn't know that this was written by an AI, I think you might think this was written by, a moody 8th grader who was going through something. And that's not, so from that perspective, it's really, maybe a moody 8th grader with a decent vocabulary. But even there, I mean, the vocabulary is not that crazy at all. It's not to say that the one with Robert Frost is necessarily going to be any great, but we'll see that in a second. But let's look at what this means to some degree. I'll give like a little attempt at an analysis here. So we have this first stanza, which is from the perspective of some lone person who's standing alone. Alone I stand, where we don't know. Okay, my heart in grief and pain. So it's just a kind of overall statement about grief for what we don't know. By the way, that's fine. Ambiguity is perfectly fine. You'll see Frost has ambiguity. Grief for my loss and pain for my disdain. Pain for my disdain. So it seems like what the person's talking about, and this is a very straightforward, almost sentence here. Alone I stand, my heart, grief and pain, grief for my loss and pain for my disdain. So one of the things about this overall poem is it's not really using the structure of language too interestingly or to convey anything. Not that I can see anyway. If someone else sees it, write it in the comments. Maybe I'm missing something, but it seems very straightforward. And again, kind of robotic. Like it's very specific. It's like, oh, they even have like, isolation in sorrow and such in here, which were the terms that I put in. But pain for my disdain. So disdain is the feeling that someone or something is unworthy of one's consideration or respect. So I'm curious what might be meant here. Now, when I read poetry, I always do try to keep an open mind that there's something that I'm not seeing yet. So maybe there's, the loss and the grief that they're having are not just words that they're trying to get to rhyme and fit the scheme, which is what it seems like. But maybe there is something about disdain and pain that, when you disdain and you have contempt over something, maybe that led to loss for this person. I don't know. Let's see if the rest of the poem informs that at all. If it's telling a story in any way, or trying to convey a unified emotional experience of any site. Or is it just, cutesy rhymes? I've never felt so low and forlorn, my sorrow deep, my hope all but worn. So hope and worn, I mean, hope, how does, that kind of metaphorical language is not terrible, I guess. Deep sorrow. These are kind of cliches that, hope all but worn. I don't know. I mean, like, you wear your the soles of your shoes because you walk around too much. And so hope you're using it so much that it's getting worn out because you hope too much. Okay. I've never felt so low and forlorn, my sorrow deep, my hope all but worn. Okay. I mean, something. I think it's a little cliche, but you can't ask for everything, I guess. No shoulder to cry on, no one to hear. So here we're getting an emphasis on the isolation, the loneliness. That's what loneliness means. Not necessarily that you're alone, although this person is literally alone, right? Alone I stand. So it's literally like, on an island by himself or herself. My sadness grows deep, a river of fear. Okay. So that rhymes with here. So there's something with no shoulders. So maybe that adds to the fear. No solace found, no one to hold, my spirit crushed, my heart grown cold. So fear leads to coldness. Again, I'm seeing a very robotic, I'm just not seeing something profound or interesting or, explanatory or even bringing you into the emotions and the experience. I want to experience something when I read imaginative literature. My heart's in despair, my soul in chains. Okay, so soul in chains, more cliches. My faith in, but again, we have some kind of rhythm and rhyme here. My faith in life all but drained. Okay, my heart's in despair. So we're just getting repetitiveness. We're not, and it's still kind of abstract. I mean, shoulder is concrete, but you have like this heart and pain and disdain. And what's the cause of it? Is it the disdain? Is it that you hope too much? Okay. My heart's in despair, my soul's in chains, my faith in life all but drained. In darkness deep, I'm lost and alone. My joy in life all but gone. Okay, so this is pretty abstract in my view for a great poem so far. I mean, it has. No, I will have to say that poetry over the last like 50, 60, 70 years, this would pass as poetry today, which is why I don't like modern poetry. This is, where I read some of the poems of the poet laureate, and I don't think she's any better than this, to be honest. So like, if you're comparing what is today considered poetry versus what I think is grand and great and the best poetry human beings can produce, I think this is garbage. It's not even an amateur's attempt. It's, someone knows the form and they just chose stuff randomly because it rhymes or whatever. That's not really, I'm lost and alone. Yes. I mean, we all, great. My joy in life all but gone. I cannot escape. I'm here to remain. My isolation, my pain, and it's too bad they didn't say despair in there. Do they even have, they have all three of the words that I chose. Isolation, sorrow, and despair. Pretty on point. Actually, I wonder if, we're about to read the Robert Frost one. I don't have it memorized. So maybe he has all three. I doubt it though. Okay. I cannot escape. I'm here to remain. My isolation, my sorrow, and my pain. But though I may feel this way for a while, my faith in life will eventually smile. So that answer, so he's going through it. So that's something like there's a kind of answer response to a sonnet where you're asking or you're presenting some kind of problem. And then you answer it usually in the first two or last 2 or 4 lines, the sestet or something like that. And no, that's not correct. That's 6. Anyway, that I see here. So, they're talking about the temporality of that feeling leading to a smile somehow. Okay. I think like, even if you don't know a lot about poetry, maybe you like this, but I'm going to challenge you with the Frost poem now, which we're going to dig into a little bit. So stick around, like give it a shot. Even if poetry is not your thing, like let's learn something together. But I think you're going to see what words can do, even simple words, and put in the proper form and structure with a great mind. So I have chosen as my poem by Frost, Acquainted with the Night. by Robert Frost. If you have taken a literature or poetry class, this is one that's often put in there. And, I've had people who are just like, what the heck does this mean? So that's one interesting thing about this whole, this particular poem. So I bet with the last poem, you felt like you understood it. I would challenge you that you don't understand it because there's not really anything being said. They use words and there's a form, but it's all abstractions. Anything you think it says, you're adding to it versus pulling out of it. You're not pulling out anything from this other poem, is my argument, essentially. And we'll see if we can pull anything out of this one. I think you can. Obviously, that's why I chose it. But let me see if I could show you and we can dig into this. And hopefully this will help you see the beauty and how great it is to have a human mind that you do. You have this wonderful thing in between your ears. If you develop it, it's not automatic. Okay, Acquainted with the Night by Robert Frost. So I'm going to read it once. You're not going to understand it, I bet. Most people don't understand it right away. I don't understand it having read it over and over again. I get things from it every time. Okay. Acquainted with the Night by Robert Frost. I have been one acquainted with the night. I have walked out in rain and back in rain. I have outwalked the furthest city light. I have looked down the saddest city lane. I have passed by the watchman on his beat and dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain. I have stood still and stopped the sound of feet when far away an interrupted cry came over houses from another street. But not to call me back or say goodbye. And further still, and at an unearthly height, one luminary clock against the sky proclaimed the time was neither wrong nor right. I have been one acquainted with the night. Okay, so the first thing to look at here is asking the question of what does the word acquainted really mean? Because, that's in the title and we're talking about acquainted with the night. So I want to think about personally, I want to think about what does acquainted really mean? One thing about poetry is it's a place where as much connotation, denotation, imagery, metaphor, analogy, rhythm, rhyme, structure, form, all the elements, all the things that can be used, the many meanings and shadings of meanings of words, meanings, all these elements, every element, the most amount of elements, I think of it like stuff, material that you just gather up and you try to put it in a powerful form that makes some sense when you read it and think about it. That's what great poetry does, is it tries to get as many aspects and things from language and incorporate them in a meaningful way. And it's an integration also of sound and sense, the making of sense. So what does acquainted mean? Make someone aware of or familiar with. It's to be an acquaintance, to know, to come to know. So acquainted means bringing together something. Okay, so he's talking about, from a very literal standpoint, he's acquainted, he's familiar with the night. Okay, so now we have to think about as we read this, what is the abstract thing he's trying to get across? So we have this familiarity with this specific thing in nature, in reality, which is concrete, nighttime. Now it's, we could talk about levels of concretization, but it's, something that we know what night is, and he's acquainted with it. He's familiar. He has connection to it, right? He's connected to it. Okay. I have been one acquainted with the night. So first off, we have the first person. He's something that he's done. He's saying about himself. I have walked out in rain and back in rain. Okay. So he has this experience of back and forth. I have outwalked the furthest city light. Now, to me, that brings up an image, something that the other poem, the AI poem, did very little, if anything. It really did none of that. I get an image of a man, I can picture almost, the city light, and he's going beyond that city light. Now he's going to attach some emotion here in the second stanza. I have looked down the saddest city lane. okay, so why is it sad? We don't really know, right? I have passed by the watchman on his beat and dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain. So now we have a very interesting thing going on here. Like, so there's a watchman, and he's not called a policeman, he's called a watchman here. So why is he a watchman? What is he watching? What's he looking for? So this narrator, the poet, has passed by the watchman on his beat. So it's like again, a policeman, and dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain. So unwilling to explain his loneliness, willing to explain why he's leaving, why he's acquainted with the night. What do we know? Why he's walking out and back in rain, why he's out walking the furthest city light. What is he not explaining? What is he not willing to explain? I don't know. Next stanza. I have stood still and stopped the sound of feet when far away an interrupted cry came over the houses from another street. I stood still and stopped the sound of feet. So it's an interesting way of saying, right? So he's walking, there's a sound of feet, and he stops. And you can, there's a way that even how he structured this, I have stood still and stopped the sound of feet when far away an interrupted cry came over houses from another street. Feet, street, obviously. I don't know. That's a interesting way of looking. Like, so what I'm getting from this, and you think you could pause and think about what you get from this is, he's going through, he's leaving the city in a sense. And this is a common thing of a man who's acquainted with the night, is familiar with darkness and being away from the things of the city, the watchers. He's alone. So I get that emphasis of aloneness, but he hears an interrupted cry far away, right? So maybe he's outside the cities. He hears something way over there, like a boo, something, right? We don't know what kind of cry it is, from over houses from another street. And he stopped the sound of feet. And then what the next stanza is actually attached to the first stanza, right? It's only a comma. It's not, the thought has not been stopped because he hasn't put a period yet. But not to call me back or say goodbye. So the sound, that the interrupted sound, now, why is it interrupted? I mean, maybe the city stopped it because there's so much other stuff going on. I don't know. But not to call me back or say goodbye. So the cry is, this is almost like this is the city itself, not a specific individual, but the overall city is having a cry. But it's not a cry of like, hey, come back, or goodbye, Mr. It's just, what is it? The semicolon. And further still, at an unearthly height, one luminary clock against the sky. Okay, a luminary clock. I think that's the moon, right? A luminary clock against the sky, maybe, but it's also, could just be like Big Ben or something, like a big, huge clock way up in the sky. But that looks, when you're far away from it, could look like, if you're really far away from it and you don't see the dials, you could just see like this bright, pale white type of a look to it. It could look like a luminary, like something, luminary means a natural light giving body, especially the sun or moon is usually with that. But he's calling it an unearthly height. So maybe it's the moon, or maybe it's a Big Ben type clock, something like that. But it's set against the sky, and he's drawing this image. It's a very clear image, whether it's the moon, whether it's a clock. It's the idea of that luminary clock should really be prominent in your head. And this is in the context of this guy leaving the city, hearing a cry from the city as he's outside in the rain, and he's seeing this thing about time there, right? That's what a clock is, or some concept of time, but it's distanced from him. He's disconnected in some way. Proclaimed the time was neither wrong nor right. So I think one of the challenges with this poem for many people is the challenge that what you may be misunderstanding is that the challenge you're having with understanding here is the same challenge that the poet is experiencing. He doesn't understand what's right or wrong about this situation, what he's looking at. So he's also confused, which is part of what makes the poem, I think, interesting, is there's a confusion that he feels, and he's not certain why he's lonely. Have you ever felt that about loneliness? I have been one acquainted with the night. So the reason I focus on the loneliness, the sorrow, the despair is because, although it's called Acquainted with the Night, there's a kind of irony with the way that he's using this. So it's, almost like it's the opposite is what he's meaning. So he's acquainted is an interesting focus, or stressing the opposite of what's really happening is he's unacquainted with everything else. So he's acquainted with this darkness, this despair, this loneliness. He's not acquainted with all these other things, with the earthly, the watchmen, the city, the screams of other people, the sounds of their feet. That he's not. He's getting distanced more and more. And there's a feeling even in the sounds that this poem makes that stresses, I think, the disconnected and the distancing from humanity and from other people that he's getting. And he's, this is where I think the sorrow kind of comes about. So one, I think there's a kind of sorrow or despair automatically in the imagery of being familiar with the night. I mean, men and women of the night are, kind of outsiders. They're disconnected. They're not part of the hustle bustle of the world. That's automatically built into the poem. And he's talking about, walking out and in rain. And I picture like a, 1920s, 30s over, or 40s, whatever, like a Casablanca, like overcoat person with his collar up, and he's out with his fedora hat. He's out in the rain by himself. I've looked down the saddest city lane. Okay, so he puts in that simple emotional language. He passes by his watchman, drops his eyes because he's not willing to talk about his loneliness. He doesn't understand how to connect with people. He stood still and stopped the sound of feet when far away and interrupted cry, and so on and so forth. Now, this is a poem you can read over and over again. You can contemplate. You can try to experience what this person is feeling. Have you ever felt isolation that felt like this? Because one thing I think that's interesting about the sorrow, the isolation, the despair that he's feeling is that often it's not this experience that we have, this human experience is not merely being alone on an island by yourself without anyone around you. Often it's a feeling of separation from people, even people right next to you, even people you're sitting next to them and you don't connect with them. It's like the feeling that's often cited in loneliness if you read about it is the feeling of feeling alone in a crowd. And I think that's where we're getting here is that, it's like, have you ever been with a crowd and people are talking about something and you just feel like you're on a boat being pushed farther and farther and farther and farther and farther away. So that even though there's 20 people or 5 or 6, 7 people, even friends, even people that you really like, and you're just not connecting with them. And, that's the feeling that I think this is getting, is it's a pushing away feeling that this poem is giving you through its sound and its meaning. And you get this through, he's literally talking about his feet are moving, and then he stops and listens as though, it's the cry of his friends or people, or maybe it's his own cry, and he's not able to connect with anything going on. And then you get the calling back and the saying goodbye, right? There's a leaving. So this whole poem is stressing the leaving, the isolation, without ever saying it, without saying, this is a poem about being alone. And it's showing it to you. Not that you can't do that, by the way, but it's showing it to you. It's making you feel it through your analysis as you read it more and more. And you think and you imagine and you conjure in your mind what's going on with this guy, this character. You can say, I've done that before. Oh, this is so familiar to me. Everyone has felt human emotion. That's why human isolation, human loneliness, frustration, sorrow, despair, all of those work for this. For the AI thing, no. If you connect with the AI poem, probably what's happening is it's not coming from the poem itself. It's not bringing anything to the table other than kind of activating abstract words that you have thought about previous to reading the poem. And then you're kind of just bringing that, all those cliches to bear, and that's it. It's just kind of like, which I think is what a lot of pop music, pop literature, pop story, like that's what they all do. what Acquainted with the Night is doing is it's really providing a crystalline image of a man. You could do paintings of this, and 1,000 of the greatest artists of all time could do 1,000 completely infinitely different pictures and all be saying something exactly the same as Robert Frost here. You could do, you could see this character in stories, and you can feel this person in your life, that this is someone not dissimilar to you. In fact, it probably has been you. So that is just a little overview of the difference between AI generated poetry or what AI can do versus what a human can do. So I'm very gung-ho about AI. I think AI will be great for small, menial, tasks that will free us up to do other things like creating poetry, like reading poetry, like reading literature, like go to the play. You have a conscious mind. The only way AI will beat us, beat you, won't beat me, because I'm an imaginative mother effer. And so I got imagination. I could come up with 1,000 different things I could do all day, every day for the rest of my life, because I have imagination. If you don't have that, it's because you're not reading literature. You're not developing your conscious mind. You have so much between your ears. And, we all need to improve that, including myself. I'm joking about that. I have so much to learn, so much. I have not, so much about science and higher understandings of science and math and literature, everything. And so do you. So let AI take over the menial, stupid tasks, like writing up these emails that are the same thing. Just type in 3 things you need this email to convey, send it out, boom, done. That's great. Now you can go read a play. Now you can go, experience a new form of music that you've never experienced before. Now you can see maybe you could create a story. You could write a short story. You could, create a new business. It's 2 side businesses that focus on, that allow you to help other people with their lives. So AI is great. It's not going to disrupt humanity. If you think it will, you don't understand economics. Because you haven't used your imaginative critical faculty of free will, consciousness. You need to develop that. So there will be disruption. People's lives will be messed up a little bit, sure. But overall, it will enhance your life, especially if you develop your conscious mind, because it's a miracle of the universe. That's the best word for it. It's a grand gift of fire from the gods. And I'm an atheist saying this. This is coming from that. All right. So if you like this, let me know. And maybe I'll do some more of these AI versus poets.